Okay. Welcome everybody to this last lecture of the Speech Prosody lecture series on behalf of the Speech Prosody Special Interest Group from ISCA. I'm Plínio Barbosa, transmitting from the University of Campinas with the help of our staff, Leonardo and Guilherme. And I'm very honored and happy to introduce you Robert Shu, who is a lecturer of linguistics at Harvard University, researching and teaching on sociolinguistics, phonetics, and linguistic anthropology. And his research is driven by these three questions. What constitutes social rurality? How does linguistic practice play a part in it? And what variation can tell us about how language works? Robert used a wide range of methods to collect linguistic and social data, including but not limited to experiment, interactive games, interviews, fieldwork, focus groups, surveys, and corpora. His analysis combined quantitative analysis of linguistic details and qualitative analysis of social patterns to uncover linguistic structure, meaning making, and processing. Thank you so much, Robert. The floor is with you.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really sorry for the delay because of the technical glitch. So today I'm going to talk about speech prosody and how to kind of talk about social meaning of prosody. There's different waves of sociolinguistic development in terms of theory. So the first wave of sociolinguistics kind of study found a robust and repeated pattern of variation correlate with macro social categories such as class, race, and gender, and showing that change enters community at the lower end of the socioeconomic hierarchy and spreads upwards. And this is the famous study by Lvov, who passed away yesterday. According to this kind of model that emerged in the first wave of studies of sociolinguistics, social change is kind of pre-social, orienting in the most unconscious and systematic reaches of the speaker's linguistic system and emerge in the speaker's most unmonitored speech, or the vernacular, or the speech that the least attention was paid to. So central to the theory of variation was the notion of vernacular, which is defined as each speaker's first acquired or most automatic, hence maximally systematic linguistic production. And the claim here is that every speaker has a personal vernacular that appeared at odds with a more kind of common definition of vernacular as the speech of locally based communities. And it is difficult to miss the fact that kind of each speaker's personal vernacular is closer to the community vernacular than to the standards. And the second wave of sociolinguistics began with the attribution of social agency to the use of vernacular as well as standard features, and a focus on the vernacular as an expression of the local or class identity. So the student, so in this seminal study of Eckert about jocks and burnouts in high school, the student social order in these schools kind of involved two mutually opposed social categories, jocks and burnout, which constitutes middle and working class cultures, respectively. And the college-bound jocks base their network, identities, and social lives in the school's kind of extracurricular sphere, forming a tight and competitive hierarchy and maintaining cooperative and even collegial relationship with the teachers and the administration or institution. While the burnout, on the other hand, kind of doing the opposite and actually leading or taking advantage of the sound change in the Northern City route shift. But like the studies in the first wave, Second wave studies kind of focus on apparently static categories of speakers and equated identity with the category affiliation, um, even though it's more kind of ethnographically linked. And importantly for us, in both first wave and second wave studies of social linguistics, prosody actually very rarely entered the conversation. And it's not until the third wave of social linguistics, prosody started to be picked up, and I'll kind of talk about why in a little bit. So whereas the first two waves view the meaning of variation as kind of incidental fallout from social space, the third wave views it as an essential feature of language. And variation constitutes a social semiotic system capable of expressing the full range of the community's social concerns. And these concerns continually change. A variable cannot be kind of consensual markers of fixed meanings. On the contrary, their central property must be indexical mutability, right? So the kind of central idea about social meaning is meaning can be indexical. That meaning a linguistic variation is point to some sort of way of contextual use of those features. And linguistic features only index macro-social categories such as gender only indirectly through mediating stances, acts, and activities in social interactions. So, for example, the meaning of uptalk or final rights terminal doesn't directly indexing or pointing to gender or female speech, but through other kinds of mode of interaction, such as uncertain or something else. And social meaning is not inherently kind of fixed within any variable. So if we looked at the social meaning of release T, we can see a variety of different kinds of meanings, even contradictory ones. So for example, the release T can mean masculinity in some communities, while more like a prisoness or diva in some other communities. So how do speakers actually interpret those different meanings when they're hearing an release T, right? And in a way, we see that the T has all these kind of meanings, and they form a constellation of ideological related meanings. And so the social meaning of the release T is not predetermined or specified, and it only comes alive when that one feature come to combine with other features into styles. So linguistic meanings, social meanings of those linguistic variables are therefore implicit, meaning I don't have to kind of directly commenting on, say, if is someone using a Boston accent, they don't need to say, "Oh, I'm from Boston," right? They can just use the variation that kind of index they're from Boston. They're underspecified because there's a constellation of meaning in the indexical field as shown in the previous slides. And meaning only comes alive when they combine with other meanings into styles, and styles were used in social interactions to kind of index certain important social distinctions. So style here is a socially meaningful clustering of features within and across linguistic levels and modalities where social meanings arise. And because the meaning of sociolinguistic variable is implicit, underspecified, and combinative, social meaning only emerges when these features combine with each other to form styles, and when those styles become contextualized in social interactions to contrast with other styles. Styles connect to the social through the role of enacting and reenacting personae, which marks the visible distinction in our social world. Therefore, Kuplan maintained that the understanding style and its social meaning needs an analysis of persona management. And persona has often been studied as an kind of intra-speaker variation across interactional situation. And personae, such as Odessa's study about diva, marks you can imagine themselves with different masks, kind of social actors put on for their interactional purposes. Individuals can use personae to perform recognizable identity work and make social moves. And as a result, those personae or enacting those personae mediate the macro social categories or information like gender and class and region and age with the kind of social interactions those personae are enacted in. However, since social meaning is not inherently linked to linguistic variables or variation, how do interactants draw on and interpret the sociolinguistic resources that construct a persona? What do the meaning potentials of these sociolinguistic resources come from? And kind of these questions echo what Goffman asked in his frame analysis. So how do we perceive social reality? And Goffman's answer is that people make sense of social behaviors through culturally determined organization and typification of social experiences or frames. So in my work, I argue that social meanings are not floating around the social semiotic landscape. Instead, the connection between social meaning and linguistic of prosodic variables are anchored by the typification of social interactions embodied by what Aga called characterological figures or character types. So the social and theoretical construct of character type are performative and salient social images of personhood that are enregistered with linguistic and other semiotic features. And enregisterment is a process where through commenting on how people perform different linguistic features and how people align with those different way of performing styles entered the public domain where it becomes widely accepted and related to specific meanings in the community. And character types establish the most conventional connection between variation form and social meaning in the social, cultural, historical landscape. Importantly, character types are born in social interactions. They are dialogical creatures. They evoke the power dynamics and social situations they often inhabit. Some familiar examples of character types would be, say, a valley girl in America, specifically in California, or in Qing's work in Beijing, the alley saunterer and smooth operators. So in my dissertation or in my work, I examined the character type by investigating the prosodic variation associated with them. And prosody, of course, encompass anything from pitch, voice quality, and timing. And unlike segmental features such as consonants and vowels, they kind of less directly tied to references and can be extremely malleable and manipulable, right? So they kind of more iconically linked to the body, affect, and personhood. and listeners have this kind of more direct understanding or social images about the speaker when they hear prosody in comparison to segmental features. As Eckert put it, they might be at the extreme of the incline of interiority, as hearers often interpret these features as the speaker's natural self. Therefore, there is no wonder they have been shown to be one of the most prominent resources to construct different types of personhood, persona, or character types. So most studies on prosody relies on carefully controlled lab speech, and not in their interactional context. So in my work, kind of focusing on Beijing Mandarin, prosodically complex language, I want to show you like a kind of more ecologically valid approach to elicit more natural data in a way, and an analysis that kind of demonstrate the systematic and dynamic interplays among different prosodic structures. So prosodic features take on those dialogical social meanings when they combine and become contextualized in the performative styles of the character types I'm going to study, not only indexing affect and personhood, but also the social relationship and power dynamics, because the interactions are inherently dialogical. Ultimately, this meaning-making process connects those moment-to-moment interaction to macro social constructions. So based on an experimental study and my fieldwork, I chose 12 character types that are universally familiar and recognizable in Beijing. They are frequently labeled and widely commented on in local discourse. In my study, speakers can easily perform them linguistically and bodily without a script and much preparation. 62 Beijing Mandarin speakers participated in an interactive game in triads. So in this game, each group of 3 people, every speaker draw random 4 of the 12 character types to perform and had the other 2 guess what they were performing. There was no script. However, none of the speakers took too long to prepare, and the performer could perform however they deem fit with their voice and their body language. And the 2 guessers were blindfolded and could only rely on their guesses based on the voice. However, after each performance, the guesser could write down up to 3 guesses of character types in order of confidence on their answer sheets. And the performances became the speech data, which I analyzed in the following. And the results kind of provides a rough perceptual evaluation of the performances for my initial processing of the data. The speakers also participated in a focus group with guided free-flowing interview as a source of my meta-discursive data to understand how these character types become salient and how they are evaluated in the local context, and what is the meta-pragmatic comments speakers have about their own performances. And all the performances and discussions were audio and video taped. Now let me introduce you to some of the character types I am reporting in this talk, and show you some performances I elicited. It's immaterial if you cannot understand Mandarin, because I'm sure you can kind of notice a lot of interesting patterns prosodically, and not only in pitch, but also voice quality and their phrasing and rhythm. So first, a bureaucrat is an old-fashioned official that gives a tedious speech in meetings. And here's a performance.
好了，都坐下啊！我们今天这个会议就3个主题啊。首先我们请这个人事部得说说最近的这个招聘情况啊。这是我们今天说第一件事儿。
Hopefully you can hear it. It's just very plain and boring in a way. And the second character type is the angry woman, or 泼妇. So this is an and unreasonable woman that causes a scene in public over something trivial. So here's a performance.
干嘛呀你？怎么了？不就打你家孩子一下吗？你家孩子有那么脆弱，打一下会死啊？就这样，怎么了？我们家孩子怎么了？我们家孩子挺好的。我告诉你啊，别让没事找事儿。哎呀，你别推我干嘛呀？哎呀，不行啊！干嘛呀你？
Next is a childish girl who is a young woman acting in a childish manner to win over favors of others, particularly the boyfriend. So here's a performance.
生气啊，对不起嘛，我又不是故意的。哎呦，真是的，好了好了，你别生气了，我给你做饭好不好？哎呀，最爱你啦，么么。
As you can hear, some of the speakers perform different types in the examples, and they sound very differently prosodically. And last, neighborhood grandma is a nosy, gossipy, self-righteous older woman next door. And the policing grandma is one that is kind of incorporated in local governance that is in charge of cleanliness and safety of the neighborhood. In the following presentation, I'll just call them together as the grandmas, even though I elicited them as two different types. And here's the performances of a neighborhood grandma.
哎呦，大姐，你们家孩子生没生啊？我的天哪！哎呦，这小妹妹，哎呦，你们家那闺女，你有没有对象啊？哎，后天咱们可出国玩去了，你们准备好了没有啊？到时候咱们可得拍照啊，没准还能跟那儿玩个烟火舞什么的。
So please note that these character types are ideologically constructs or social abstractions. I elicit them to understand the relation between semiotic resources, especially prosodic resources, and social meaning, not to capture and ambush a real grandma in their neighborhood, even if I can, which I can't because it's abstract. To analyze the data, I chose performances that are best guessed by the guessers and have enough speech materials, and they're force aligned and manually corrected. And I further annotated the data to have multiple structural and prosodic levels for different analysis. Next, I'll present 3 studies focusing on different prosodic domains, pitch, voice, and timing, and see how kind of social meanings emerge in those domains. First, in pitch. So pitch is a fundamental tool in human expressions, of course, right? It operates at lexical, sentential, discursive levels, even for singing. And the prevalence and malleability of pitch, as well as the iconic relationship with the body, think frequency quote, making it a convenient, effective resource to convey social meanings and construct personae. However, past studies mostly use controlled lap speech and take away the complicated interplays between different levels and pitch use, especially considering variation in the social domain in interactions. So here I aim to complicate the picture of pitch variation through the lens of Beijing Mandarin, which is a tonal language that also has lexical stress. So by investigating the performances of those character types, I will show that pitch variation is an inventory of stylistic resources that operate simultaneously and orderly at different levels with potentials to index various qualities of persona. And I will highlight here the results from 3 character types: bureaucrat, angry woman, and childish girl. I measured F0 value and transformed them in semitone and have different kind of way to kind of look at both the intonational level and lexical level. So let's look at the results for the F0 pattern over the course of the performances, first as an estimation of pitch variation at the intonational level. So globally, the loud, in-your-face, kind of attention-grabbing angry woman uses the highest pitch. And bureaucrat, who is more reserved, calculative, powerful, whose speech requires kind of leaning in and extra effort in attention, uses the lowest F0. And the pitch height used by childish girl for something in between. And the differences between all pairs are significant. Let's look at the result for, and the general pattern of intonational level seems to persist if we look at the average pitch height of the level tones for both the high level tone 1 on the left and the low tone 3 on the right. So Angry Woman has the significantly higher tone 1 and tone 3. And Bureaucrats, on the other hand, has the lowest tone 3 with very low variance. But their tone 1, high in variance, is lower than Angry Woman, but similar to Childish Girl. This asymmetry of variance between the high-level tone and the low tone might occur because of the Bureaucrat's general low pitch, which leaves no room in the lower tone space to explore any variability. Therefore, if the performance of the Bureaucrat needs to use any pitch variation at the lexical tone level, it does so in its higher tone space by kind of shifting the ceiling with high-level tone 1. For the contour tones, the pitch register seems to follow the global intonational pattern, with Angry Woman having the highest tone 2, the rising tone, on the left, and tone 4, the falling tone, on the right. And the Bureaucrats kind of the lowest for both. However, if we look at the pitch range of the contour tones, which indicates how much the pitch rises and falls throughout the tone contour, character type does not have a significant effect before and after speech rate is controlled. So this shows that it is the priority for the contour tones to maintain their tone shape and identity and not shifting tone register, but only shifting the tone register to participate in meaning-making variation. Let's look at the tone space of these character types. So not surprisingly, the tone space of Angry Woman has the highest register, in fact, so high that its low tone is higher than the other character type's highest tone. And Bureaucrat and Childish Girl have kind of a lower and overlapped tone space. Bureaucrat has a much larger tone space than Childish Girl, possibly because of their speech rate and how careful Bureaucrat handled each word to sound standard and official. So now let's turn to Childish Girl to see what happens in that narrow tone space. The performances of Childish Girl use pitch in a unique way. First, full tone was used in the place of neutral tone in unstressed syllables, eliminating the stress contrast. For example, 兔兔 instead of 兔兔, 包包 instead of 包包, making Childish Girl sounds less local but southern, young, and baby-like, as discussed in Zhang's work about cosmopolitan Mandarin. Moreover, Childish Girl used a kind of a melodic template of LHL that is very similar to the final tone sequence of Aegyo, a comparable character type in South Korea. However, the L and H here are not realized as low and high pitch, but smaller and larger pitch range. Let me illustrate that with an example.
老公就想要这个嘛，咱们今天就吃这个吧。
So in this example, the first utterance, which consists of this one syllable of discourse marker, LHL, is realized as a low-high-low pitch sequence. However, in the following two utterances, where the H occurs at a high falling tone, 就, the pitch range enlarges with an extreme high start, while the phrases before and after the H have smaller pitch range and flattened the pitch contour. In the second example, hopefully you can hear it, the H actually takes place on the lower, in a low tone, 买, and the enlarged pitch range caused the pitch to sink so low that it becomes creaky and untraceable, while the pitch contour before and after also flattened. So for Childish Girl, the melodic template occurs in most speakers' performances and overrides the intonational patterns. To conclude the pitch session, I propose that F0 variation is a complex inventory of stylistic resources that operate simultaneously at various linguistic and paralinguistic levels. Pitch variation is polyphemus, right? There is an order of accessibility to how these resources are used for stylistic purposes. Melodic templates may override intonation, but intonation and melody together, they evoke the signature qualities of these character types. And lower levels, on the lexical levels, like phonological and phonetic realizations of lexical tones and stress, are restrained by those higher levels, but can still be used to stylize specific aspects of the character types by shifting registers and creating different tone space, or choosing to realize the neutral tones as full tones, and extra and extra. So broad range of social meaning kind of emerge from practicing those different F0 resources, creating a dynamic indexical space from which social actors can draw on to foreground certain qualities of those character types in their own social interactions. Next, let's look at voice quality. The voice quality can broadly be defined as the characteristic auditory coloring of the speaker's speech. It results from the configuration of both the larynx, including but not excluding to the mode of vocal folds, as well as upper vocal tract from the pharynx to the oral and nasal cavity. While some regard voice quality essential, therefore kind of semi-permanent to a speaker's identity because of its intimate relationship with the body, it is highly malleable and manipulable, changing from moment to moment, presenting a speaker's social membership and standing. It is also an iconic representation of speakers' affective stance, signaling the changes of their physical and emotional states. So Podesva's study on diva and Star study on Japanese sweet girl has shown that voice quality is a key stylistic element in the construction of personae. Voice quality is not easy to capture, of course, and many, especially sociolinguistic studies, kind of label only one quality of the voice at a time, while some studies show kind of variability at specific utterance positions, specifically the final positions, and temporal variability is kind of less attended to. So in my study, I used character type as a vehicle to elicit stylistic performances that are rich in voice quality variation, right? So I examined how voice quality vary in dynamic and structured ways and how it take on locally salient social meanings. So in this part, I will highlight the results of Bureaucrat, Angry Woman, and Childish Girl. The results for the grammas will be shown but not elaborated in this talk. Of course, I'm sure everyone here knows some voice qualities have robust acoustic correlates and can be measured acoustically. For example, correlated H1 minus H2 correlates with the openness of vibrating vocal folds. At the lower end, the vocal folds vibrate closer to each other and often indicating creak or creaky voice, but also could indicate other close voice qualities such as tenseness. While CPPS measures the regularity of vocal fold vibration, higher being more regular. Okay. I also measure tension in the voice by dividing average intensity and higher frequency by intensity at lower frequency. And the higher voice intensity is, the tenser the voice might sound. So let's look at the results. First, speakers perform character types with different global vocal settings. The results show that the attention-seeking, in-your-face angry woman, whose performances often centers around conflicts in the public, has significantly lower H1 minus H2 on the left and CPPS on the right. And auditorily, the performances of angry woman performed by many does not sound creaky, but pressed and tense. And now let's listen to an example. So this is the normal voice versus the performance voice. Okay, so the voice doesn't sound creaky. Instead, it has this shrieking, tense quality with tension placed along the vocal tract. Towards the end, you can especially hear the pharyngeal tension in the voice. And the tension really shows up in the results for vocal intensity, where the calculation of the ratio of average intensity at higher frequency to intensity at lower frequency. So the results show that angry woman has a much higher vocal intensity than the other character types, suggesting they have little intensity damped at higher frequency, and their lower vocal tract at larynx and pharynx might have more muscular tension. The tensity of the voice co-occurs with harsh swear words and standing position posture. Many speakers chose to perform angry woman standing, while other types sitting down, with extensive pointing and body movement. So the use of tense voice and these other semiotic resources with the body together iconically resembles the perception of these character types shown up in the meta-discursive comments made by my participants, who discussed the angry woman as always sounding forceful and yelly, calling attention to the fight, and the sharp yelling voice of angry woman is doubly purposed. It is directed towards the person they had trouble with strong affective force, but it also summons attention to set up a stage to create a scene from the outlookers. Back to the global vocal voice setting, we can also see that Childish Girl, whose strategic flirting also aims at influencing the interlocutor, uses a significantly less regular vocal vibration as shown by its CPPS in comparison to the bureaucrat and grandmas. In addition to the low CPPS indicating less regular vocal vibration, we also found some other vocal features used to perform a Childish Girl. For example, we can hear in this example. Oh, sorry. So two things are especially notable in this performance. The speakers use falsetto to mimic a young girl's voice. He also manually pinched his nose to make it sound nasal. This is kind of reflected in the meta-discursive comments as well. So the soft voice is hyper-feminine, but at the same time, it uses a nasal quality to sound childlike and weak, and therefore requiring more attention and protection from the boyfriend. Interestingly, the nasality of this kind of voice is more ideologically constructed than articulatorily realistic. As long as its quality has something to do with the nose, it doesn't even matter if you are rejecting airflow into the nasal cavity. Next, variation also took place at the temporal levels for voice quality. And here I am showing the pattern of H1 minus H2 variation along the course of an utterance throughout performances on the utterance level. So while generally H1 minus H2 lowers towards the end of an utterance, the declination of this H1 minus H2 for angry woman extremely drastic, indicating that it becomes even more pressed than other character types at the end of an utterance. Childish Girl does not seem to have a declination of H1 minus H2, unlike the other types, suggesting a consistent vocal voice quality throughout the course of an utterance. As shown here, H1 minus H2 also varies at different degrees throughout the entire performance at a discursive level. A larger degree of variation is found in Angry Woman and Childish Girl, despite Childish Girl's lack of variation at the utterance level. This suggests that voice variation can operate at different linguistic levels. In contrast, the least variation is found in the reserved and monotone bureaucrats. This graph shows the variability of H1 minus H2 among speakers. Across speakers. While the speakers perform Angry Woman in very variable voices, speakers seem to converge to a certain vocal setting for bureaucrat, which has the least inter-speaker variability. This suggests that the types like bureaucrat are either more ideologically conventionalized in voice, or they're more modal and requires less effort to perform. In this example of bureaucrats, as you can listen,
我们现在开一个职工代表大会。
Actually, we might listen to this later too. So the lack of variability of voice at different linguistic levels and among individual speakers is reflected in the meta-discursive comments. Bureaucrat is regarded boring, monotone, and always sounds the same. They exhibit authority by posing and speaking in a motionless setup. All the speakers performed the bureaucrat with a rigid sitting position and limited body and hand movements. Many of them even held the paper like this as a prop, requiring attention while not really using a variable voice is really a power move if you think about it. So in conclusion, the findings here highlight the dynamic nature of voice quality, right? Variationists have benefited a lot from Laver's work and the Larigio articulator model proposed by Eflin et al. As this model kind of bridges articulation and auditory quality. However, it tends to classify voice quality as types instead of treating them as varying gradients. Examining voice quality as dynamic variables enables us to kind of avoid labels that have become strongly associated with variationist studies focused on English, and allows us to understand its variability at different linguistic and discursive levels, as my study shows. The meta-discursive analysis further supports the character type as a critical site to examine the rematization of linguistic and social differences, which is brought into being in part through the complex use of voice quality. By varying the voice at different levels and uniting multiple qualities, speakers can index different stylistic elements of personhood that are abstracted from dialogical interactions in everyday life. And finally, voice quality not only helps to typify a persona contextualized by the body, but also contributes to forge this kind of social relationship and power dynamics to addressee in particular social interactions.
Please, Robert, you have 5 minutes.
Okay, let's see if I can do a little bit about timing variation. Social linguists have surveyed different timing variables in stylistic practices separately, such as speech rate, pause, rhythm, and so on, right? However, timing is infamously hard to measure and capture, and I argue that this is because a lot of those timing elements are intrinsically linked to each other. And here I propose a more holistic approach to capture timing variation and show how that can help us to understand its social meaning. And I will highlight the results of neighborhood grammar and bureaucrats. So I propose there are 3 different dimensions of timing variation. The temporal dimension includes speech or sign rate, as well as like acceleration and deceleration. The rhythmic dimension pays attention to the pattern of recurring linguistic rhythm and units, and the cadential dimension is about the pause and the prosodic boundaries. And importantly, I argue that the social meaning can only observe if we also consider not only those 3 dimensions working together, but all 3 working together with the discourse structure. So let's listen to this a little bit.
我们现在开一个职工代表大会。今年我们厂的形势一片大好。
Okay, so in this performance, the quantitative results show that the bureaucrat was performed with long and variable utterances and low and steady speech rate, a higher variable vowel duration. They also sound less syllable timed, use more pauses, and have more variable pauses duration. And if we we can make sense of these variation in with a closer look to how they function in the discourse. So as you can hear in this example,
今年我们厂的形势一片大好，这都是各部门的同志们齐心协力的结果。
行，我们再讨论一下这个财务情况啊。第三个主题啊。
So as you can hear in those examples, pauses were added within utterance, breaking up intonational phrase. And many of these pauses were led by one or more discourse markers. This can be the marker or click, or a combination of those two in no particular order. The click is often associated with a displeased or condescension stance in Mandarin. Furthermore, even without a pause, syllables can be lengthened and create marked phrasing within an intonational phrase. In this last example,
那个是吧？对吧？那个是吧？那个对吧？
The speaker performed the bureaucrat with no semantic content, but really just the prosodic, specifically the timing profile of this character type, with discourse markers and long pauses. On the other hand, the grammar, if we listen to one example, the quantitative results show that they have significantly faster speech rate, less variable vowel duration, sounding more and syllable time, and use the least pauses. And if we look at those in kind of concrete examples,
门口那个门洞子修好了吗？上次您跟我说那事儿我都记着呢，我已经跟他们说了，他们过两天给您看去啊。
So contrary to the bureaucrat, the grammars avoid pauses even between utterances, sometimes by doing abrupt join or accelerating the beginning of an utterance after the juncture. And there's also a lot of reduction and syllable contractions in the grammar speech. In these examples,
哎呦，大姐，你们家孩子生没生啊？我的天哪！哎呦，这小妹妹，哎呦，你们家那闺女，你有没有对象啊？哎，后天咱们可出国玩去了，你们准备好了没有啊？
So in this example, we see the prevalent use of topic marker ayo, as well as two other ways the grammar used to kind of avoid pauses. Rush through, the acceleration at the end of an utterance before the juncture, or modular pivot, an element of speech that could be syntactically linked to either the utterance before or after. In my data, some modular pivots the grammar uses includes interjections, address terms, or adverbs. I want to kind of draw your attention to the different floor holding strategies of those two character types. Bureaucrat uses long pauses with discourse markers, while the grammar avoid pauses by using conversational strategies such as rush through, abrupt join, and modular pivot. This highlights the different participation frames and power dynamics they live in. As my speakers put it, the bureaucrat is all about the right to speak, and they use speaking time as capital for power. While the gossipy in-your-face grammar is in interactions where participants have equal rights to speak, but grammar impose themselves on the interlocutors. Therefore, the timing strategies of the bureaucrat is about I'm still talking, while the grammar is about it's not your turn yet. In summary, I argue that we need to analyze character types as dialogical constructs. The performances I elicited were monologues, yet conversation structure is really embedded in them. I propose a holistic view towards timing variation. It might be hard to pinpoint social meanings of individual timing variables, but they are constructional in packaged configurations, of which the social meaning emerge when they conspire with the discursive or discourse structure. Hopefully, I also show you that in order to understand the social meaning of timing variation, we need to draw from the toolkits of both social phonetics and conversational analysis. if we put everything together, my work kind of demonstrate that character type as a vital social and theoretical construct to understand social linguistic styles in interactions. I show that each prosodic domain, pitch, voice quality, or timing, prosodic features work in multi-dimensional ways. Such multidimensionality requires a holistic analysis within and beyond phonetic observations. Different prosodic features might index different qualities of those character types. As a result, multifaceted personhood emerges in dialogical social engagement and through complex interactions of prosodic packages delivered in embodied discourse. In this process, the abstract and the ideologically construct character types connects and anchors social meaning to stylistic packages in the social semiotic landscape and allows moment-to-moment interaction to inform, reinforce, and promote change to the macro-social structure. Speakers familiar with this landscape and therefore can draw on some of those resources individually or in packages to construct more fluid personae in their own everyday interactions to achieve their social goals. And that's all for my talk for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert. We have some time for questions.
Of course.
Okay.
As always, we need some time for the audience to write their question in the chat.
It was a very vibrant and very interesting, complete presentation. Thank you so much, Robert.
Of course, hopefully the audio all worked well after the initial problems.
I have just, when we are waiting for questions, I have two quick questions for you.
Mm-hmm.
One is, do you intend to analyze body gestures, especially related to speech, code gestures, because you have the videos? This is the first question. And the other question is, do you intend to use other acoustic correlates of voice quality besides the ones you used? Because the only thing that the ones you used showed was a difference between the angry woman and the other ones. Maybe if you use, I don't know, harmonic to noise ratio or other kinds of acoustic correlates of voice quality, you could show difference across the other types as well.
Actually, I did look at harmonic to noise ratio and other measurements that I didn't talk here. Some of those features, some of those correlates are just not very good to compare cross speaker. And some of them provide some data, some kind of differences, but it's very hard to kind of interpret in terms of meaning or kind of auditorily. So that's why I kind of didn't really go into details about those measurements. And I think code gesture is definitely something, especially with pitch, right? It's something very interesting to look at because prosody is really not only produced by the body, it's also creating the body, right? So I think there's very interesting question to ask when we're looking at how speakers not only use their voice, but use their bodies as a whole, which is why the reason why when I looked at voice quality, I feel it's a natural connection to also look at body to kind of more kind of rudimentary degree for now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Gustavo, do you have any question?
I have a question.
You have a question from Marta?
Oh, okay. Oh,
Gustavo is copying the question to you in the Zoom chat.
Yeah, of course.
Now, from Marta Ortega. Do you see it?
Oh, yes. What extent do you... So the question is, to what extent do you think that some of these packages of prosodic features used to build personae are cross-cultural? Great question. I think there's because I think exactly because we have this idea. I think well, meaning is never natural, right? Meaning always kind of were given born in interactions, in social interactions. But there are some kind of more fundamental connections to some features and meaning, in a way, because of how they iconically link to the body, right? So those are the meanings, such as what Ohala talked about in frequency codes, right? Kind of. So those seem to have a little bit more cross-cultural, cross-linguistic kind of consistency. And I think in that sense, there should be some sort of meaning that is more cross-culturally recognizable. But I think ultimately, when we are talking about linguistic resources and meaning, right? We have to really look at how speakers use them in the local discourse, right? Because ultimately, social meaning and stylistic variation is about social distinction. It's about what is important in terms of social distinction in that local community, in that specific culture, right? So I think if we kind of lose sight of that and just thinking about meaning as kind of just universal, we kind of also lose sight of the fact that language is not just a object, but a practice, right? Hopefully that's a good way to put it.
Okay, thank you. We have another one.
So the question is, I'm not familiar with the notion of tone space. Could you elaborate on that? How is it different from pitch range? Okay, so the tone space is really just a way to represent how all the tone together. So in my data, the way I present tone space here is really just look at the all four tones of Mandarin together and see what kind of pattern they are presenting. While pitch range is really just the range of pitch in individual tones. And I think it's actually interesting to look at tone space as a whole, right? Because socially, you can actually see that speakers have very different tone space in different character types, in performing different character types. The bureaucrat would have a very large tone space, meaning the higher ceiling and the low floor has a big range. And I think tone space is also interesting in a lot of prosodically complex languages that have a lot of tones. For example, in Cantonese, right? There's a very distinction. There's a big distinction between the lower tone space, which is very crowded, a lot of tone occupy that space, versus the higher tone space, which only have like 2 tones. So in that sense, you can really see how different variability kind of takes place in different range of speakers' pitch. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay. Any other questions? Do you think angry men would be very different from angry women? What do you think about angry men, Robert?
Oh yeah. So actually, as you can see, a lot of the character types I elicited were stereotypically female in gender, right? And I think that's there for a reason. I don't think angry man is a thing in China, in Beijing, because in a way, all those types are about social distinction, right? And people just gaze on like female, like the way we ideologicalize language is really gendered, right? That's why like a lot of those character types are actually gendered. I actually asked the participants, like, so there's the neighborhood grandma, right? Do we have neighborhood grandpa? They were like, if we have to think about it, there might be, but it's actually very hard to think about how they perform, what kind of linguistic resources they use, right? Because all eyes are on young women, are on those grandmas, and we have a lot of social comments about them, but really not about a lot of meaning that's kind of readily available, that's kind of put on the male body as, yeah, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. And did you find any, sorry for so many questions, but did you find the important difference when men performed these female characters?
I think I haven't
Besides the
had
one with the nose.
Yeah, I that's a next step I want to look at is like in how individual speakers of different kind of body and voice perform those character types. Right now, I think the most prominent example is like men tend to use more falsetto when performing
Yeah.
some female, especially hyper feminine character types or kids. But I think that is a very interesting question to keep looking.
Okay, thank you. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions? Thank you. Any other questions, Gustavo?
I
From the
don't
chat?
think so. I think that's all.
Okay. Then I would like to thank you again, Robert, for this very interesting and exciting presentation. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful.
Thank you very much.
And thank you the public for the questions and for the presence. Thank you so much.
Have a good break, everyone, and have a good holiday season.
Thank you for you too. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you, Gustavo. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you so much. I'm so sorry about the